Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you because I would not do justice to your background and all the wonderful and extraordinary things that you do. But all I can say is we are so grateful that you're sharing your time and considerable expertise with all of us. We really, really, really appreciate it. And we're honored to have you here. So
Thanks.
without further ado, take it away, Rachel.
Thanks for having me. And the first thing I want to do is a quick check just to make sure that you are seeing the actual slide. So if someone can give me a thumbs up, I'll always feel better when you do that. Thank you. The one time I don't ask that is the time I screw everything up, and I have multiple screens going, so it's always kind of complicated. Thank you so much for having me. I will introduce myself a little bit more during the actual presentation, but just to begin, my name is Rachael Barlow. I work at Wesleyan University. I grew up in Portland, Connecticut, with Kathy Berbolis' son. He was my year. So, yeah, I'm a longtime Connecticut person, and my father taught at Wesleyan, and my mother was a grad student there. So I've been in Middletown a very long time, except for when I went to college and grad school. So I really appreciate connecting with people in Middlesex County. I will tell you a little about how I fell into talking about AI. But first, I sort of would just want to give you a sense of what I wanted to sort of do for you guys today. And we can go completely off of this track. I can say a million things about AI. I do these sessions all the time. There's a million things to say, and it's really hard to pick what will cram into an hour session. So let's see how things go. And like Cynthia said, I'll be sure to pause at various moments and get some questions going so we can have a more kind of casual chat. So one thing I thought I could try to do for you is try to build a little bit of a shared understanding of generative AI in particular, which is the thing everyone's been talking about for the last three, almost 4 years now. I will in particular draw on higher education's experience because that's the one that I'm in to sort of highlight some of the sort of interesting things that are going on, also the challenges of working within this environment where sort of the technology is never stopping. It's always ahead of us, and we're all just trying to catch up. I'll try to give you a little sense of some practical applications. Again, you'll see my examples are very higher ed based, but hopefully you guys have the chance to sort of extrapolate from my examples. And again, you can ask me questions along the way. If you're associated with various kinds of organizations, including the one that brought us here today, it's worth thinking about how the organizations with which you connect may already be using AI or might in the future. So those are the things that I want to start with. But to begin, I thought we could maybe use the chat just to get a little bit of a sense of where people are. And also, if somebody wants to raise their hand and say something out loud too, that's fine. But I have some questions for you. I want to learn a little about who's in the room. Have you played with any large language models? And if so, which ones? So if you've had the opportunity to touch generative AI in particular, I'd love to know what you've actually touched. It's also fine to put in the chat. I've done nothing. I know nothing. Almost every room I go into has a mix of responses, so that is fine. All right, thank you. So I'm seeing lots of ChatGPT, no surprise. Some Gemini. See if anyone else. Thank you for putting stuff in. It always helps to know who's there. Got our first Claude. Nothing is fine too. All right, so I'm getting a sense of who's in the room. That's super helpful. Next question, and you can continue answering the first question as well. Have you found like a good use case for generative AI, particularly in your work, but even your personal life as well? What has it been useful for, if anything? And again, I'll give you guys a chance to throw something in the chat. I want to know what's been useful, if anything. And if it's been terrible, that's actually also really interesting information to have. So I see brainstorming, some planning and drafting, trip planning. I've done that too. Some research on various kinds of areas. Oh, the customer service agent. So that gets into a whole new territory. Great. All right, so I'm getting some examples. Very helpful. Thank you. And I can definitely share my own examples if the moment is right. How are your feelings about generative AI? Are they generally positive, negative, or ambivalent? So I'm curious about how you're feeling about it. And this is where things can I see meh, curious, mixed, ambivalent. That's probably where I am. Excited. Thank you. And I think depending on who's in the room, this can look very different, but there's almost always a spread. So certainly at Wesleyan, we have faculty who are in a very, very anti-AI camp, and we have faculty that are knee deep in it, and we see that same spectrum among students. It's super complicated. We're in like a tense, heated movement at Wesleyan right now about all of this, and I think that's probably pretty typical. And I'm glad that you guys are feeling comfortable enough to put some of those kind of wide variety of views in the chat too, because I think that's really important. Usually, when I meet with Wesleyan students in particular, I tell them that my role is to bring them to the middle. So I acknowledge there's some of you who are very worried about the climate impact, and there's some of you who think this is the coolest thing ever. And my argument is that you should be both equally intrigued and deeply disturbed. And that this is one of those moments where it's not exactly clear what's going to happen, and there's probably good things and bad things that come with this new technology. So that's probably important for you guys to hear about me, that that is sort of the frame that I am in. I do play with AI a lot, but it doesn't mean I don't also have lots of concerns about what's going to happen. Certainly within the field of education, there are incredibly big questions. So thank you for sharing. So let me give you a little bit more of my history. So I was trained as a sociologist. I went to Indiana University out in the Midwest for my sociology degrees, for my graduate degrees. And about halfway through my graduate training, I actually came back to Connecticut pretty quickly. My father was really ill, and I desperately needed to get a job. And so I got a job at Trinity College in Hartford as a data librarian. Sociologists usually have like a statistical background, and so I was able to use that stats to get that particular job. And I was at Trinity for 12 years. And once I finished up my doctorate, I started taking on new tasks, always sort of just making things up as I went along. I got into a lot of accreditation work. And ultimately, that's what led me to getting a job at Wesleyan. By the way, I think I've applied for maybe 5 jobs at Wesleyan, and this was finally the one that I got that involved a lot of data analysis in the Office of Institutional Research. So within that office at Wesleyan, I did a ton of surveys and also a lot of qualitative research, interviewing students about their experiences and their majors. And I tell you all of that in part to kind of preface what this feels like shifting my focus to what I'm now doing. So, what happened in December 2022? You might recall that that was when ChatGPT 3.5 came out. I was not paying attention to the news, and my colleague in the library, Andrew White, leaned over to me at a meeting and said, "Hey, have you heard about these chatbots? I think we're going to have to do something." So that's how I was introduced to this. I had no idea what was going on. I went and Googled it later, and then slowly fell down the ChatGPT rabbit hole, so to speak. And what happened as a result of that is, since I first came to Wesleyan and now, and this really evolved over the last 3 years, I ended up actually getting a new role at Wesleyan. So now I'm the director for the Center for Faculty Career Development. And this is a job that helps faculty with their teaching, getting grants, onboarding when they first get to Wesleyan. And part of the reason I got that job was because as this AI thing unfolded, my colleague and I in the library and somebody else in ITS just started holding sessions for faculty. So tons and tons of workshops as the technology was evolving. And we didn't even start doing that until we kind of read what was in the news for about 6 months. So I've slowly sort of taken on this role of just trying to help people deal with a really dramatic technological shift at Wesleyan. I've also fallen into a very related role outside of Wesleyan. So I'm on a team that is running the AI Ready series for the Council of Independent Colleges. So this is a council of about 500 colleges. These are usually really small liberal arts colleges who pool their resources to get training to everyone that's in the consortium. And they've been doing this series for 2 years. They're going to do another one next year. And these are webinars that often have somewhere between 200 and 800 people in them. And we cover different topics every month. So we did 1 month of just talking to the admissions office people at all of these schools about what is AI going to do for admissions, another month on what's it going to do for advancement in fundraising, and another month on what it's going to do for the faculty and so forth. So that's sort of my AI background. But I'm putting both of these on screen to make the point that AI is going to shift a lot of what we might end up doing. And I sort of think of the fact that I've sort of had to reinvent myself multiple times as this AI piece for me is just another having to reinvent it. And I work at a liberal arts college. I would argue that the whole point of a liberal arts college is to teach our students how to pivot on a dime. And that's what lots of us are having to do right now as this sort of changes sort of work life for a lot of people, not to mention personal life. So that's sort of the background and the history. Um, Now I want to pause and tell you a little of how we tried to handle this at Wesleyan, and that's probably a moment where I'll probably pause and let you guys ask some questions once I get through this. So the first thing we really did as a team at Wesleyan, and again, this was maybe 3 to 5, basically staff members as this started to unfold, was we read everything we could get our hands on. I know one of the questions that was submitted prior to this webinar was about like, where do you learn or go to read more? I mean, there's a million places to go to learn more about generative AI in particular. This is my set of people that I tend to read. Almost all of them, I think, have Substack accounts. So I found Substack and I think also, really, to be honest, LinkedIn as the place where I can get lots of sort of up-to-date information about what's happening. Almost all the other sort of like publication mediums are too like slow. So certainly academic papers are too slow to keep up with what's going on. So I found again Substack and LinkedIn and this particular set of names to be particularly helpful. And these are definitely ones with a sort of higher ed inflection to them. We also took courses. So for me, the ones I might point you to are offered through Coursera. So these are MOOCs, particularly the ones offered by Jules White from Vanderbilt, who is a computer scientist and is very, very good at talking about these things. I think he has like, I haven't even checked this. This slide's a little out of date now. It's probably something like 50 courses that he offers specifically that are about generative AI and different aspects of it. So the very first one I did was prompt engineering for ChatGPT, and that really helped me get a base, kind of like a baseline of how to use ChatGPT in particular, but generally how to prompt within an AI tool. And then we did a lot of playing. So in the beginning, we focused a lot on ChatGPT, and that was usually the one that everybody had heard of. Judging from what I saw in the chat, you can see that's obviously changed. It certainly has changed in our campus. Gemini is the big one for everyone because, as you know, if you do a Google search, there's a Gemini summary at the top. But also, given what's been in the news at the federal level, now everybody knows what I almost said who, which is scary. What Claude is. So the Claude is now one of the ones that everyone is highly aware of, and so forth. So that was sort of my trajectory. It's probably still the trajectory that happens for a lot of people. You need to read up. You need to kind of read things that have been published in the last 3 months because things are moving so rapidly. There are a lot of high quality courses out there that you can take, and you need to experiment. So let me pause for a second there and see if there's like 1 or 2 questions we want to maybe take live. If anyone has any, you could use the chat if you want to put a question in there, but I talk very fast and I can go very, very quickly through this. But I want to pause and see if there's any questions so far.
So none, oh, hold on. I was about to say none in the chat or the Q&A
Just
yet,
got a
but
chat
there
one.
you go.
Yeah. So when it comes to key lessons with prompting, I mean, the biggest one is probably you never just put in one prompt. As they like to say, you iterate. So you put something in and then you see what it gives you and you put something else in and you keep nudging it until the output gets better and better. Very early on, and I still say this, I would tell people it's garbage in, garbage out. If you don't prompt well, you're more likely to get output from these tools that's not as good as you want where it hallucinates, so it makes things up. And there's ways to curb some of that quote bad behavior if you prompt better. So kind of there's if you Google prompt frameworks, you'll see a whole bunch come up in Google. So one thing is to basically give your the AI a persona for the task you want it to complete. So pretend that you are my assistant, or even don't even say pretend. You are my assistant. Here's what I need you to do. Here's the audience for which you're going to be generating something for me. So for me, I'll say, you're my assistant, write this email I need to send to the faculty, use this particular tone, use this particular format. So sort of persona, audience, tone, format. Those are some of the really important things in terms of prompting to get better output. I would also argue I rarely use ChatGPT the way I would use Google. I don't trust it the way I would trust in a regular Google search. So instead of, I don't typically go to ChatGPT for a lot of facts. or Gemini or any of these tools, I tend to ask it for things like give me 10 perspectives on something historically that happened versus tell me what the answer is for something historical, for instance. I've tried to train faculty, like faculty will come to me all the time and say, I put this in ChatGPT and they gave me false information. And usually my response is, you're using it wrong. That's really not its best use. One of its best use, I think, is brainstorming, as somebody said in the chat. So I will say, hey, I need a new title for the course I'm teaching. Here's the course description. Give me 20 options. And then me, as the human, I go in and I decide what are the best options. So it's a little of what I have done with prompting over the years. I can give you more examples later, depending on how the conversation goes. Anyone else, either orally or in the chat? No pressure. Just want to make sure. All right. So I'm going to keep going, but I'll pause again, I promise. After we did all that sort of research, which was really what the point of that previous screen was, we started holding a lot of workshops. This is just a little example of what we did on our campus. And remember, it's higher ed, so they have a certain flavor to them. One thing we did early on, this is in January 2024, seems early on. We asked faculty in January to bring assignments that they were going to use in their classes that semester. We invited them to try to bring one that they thought was what we called AI avoidant, one that they thought was AI proof. And we also invited them to come up with AI friendly ones. There were not many of those. So there were lots of attempts to bring in AI avoidant assignments. And then we put them in ChatGPT 4, which we had just bought our first license for. And we watched what AI would do. And so this was, by the way, a sobering session for a lot of faculty because many assignments at the time that they thought would be AI proof, of course, it turned out were not. I had a different version of this flyer that had like a skull and crossbones, like everything's over as a sort of joke. And I decided it was probably not a good idea to send that to my faculty. There we really wanted faculty to just get a sense of what students might be doing for better or for worse. We did a number of what we call generative AI petting zoos. So the idea here, particularly in the early stages, was that faculty were particularly reluctant to log into some of these tools, and understandably so. So we would create accounts for some of the tools that were coming out. We'd have them on different laptops in a room, and faculty could come in and play with them without feeling like they were giving up any personal information. Those were super popular. I've twice had the assessment lab that I run, which is all students present to faculty so that faculty have a better sense of what's happening from the student side. The one we did last year was on all of the unofficial resources that students use to get their academic work done. So things like Khan Academy and Quizlet, and of course, ChatGPT and other AI tools as well. So I think that was good for faculty to hear. We just did one last week about the concept of busy work. And my argument there was that the work that students are most likely to outsource to AI is the work that they define as busy work. And so faculty need to get a handle on how that's defined. And again, I think the student perspective is really important. And then we've repeatedly done for our faculty AI policy labs. So faculty can figure out how they want to articulate what the policy is going to be in their course. And I'll talk about some other policy stuff in a second. So here's how we've tried to get people up to speed while we have been really, to be honest, working alongside them and trying to figure things out, and often coming into a room, showing something on screen and realize, oh, wow, it looks different than it did this morning. Now this tool is doing Y when it was doing X before. So that's been a lot of what this has felt like. Most recently, I've moved away from one session workshops to what are called faculty learning communities. This is where you get 4 or 5 faculty in a room together and they meet for multiple sessions. So this semester it was 4 sessions to get a little bit more deep understanding of what's going on. So this particular one on the left, I did a build a bot faculty learning community. I actually had 13 faculty sign up, so I had to divide them into 3 different groups. And they built bots, AI bots, over the course of this semester that had different goals essentially. So for instance, I had one faculty member who wanted to be able to upload the articles he's written and get the abstract written by the bot. I had one faculty member who teaches film who made a brainstorming bot to guide students in a very specific way, to brainstorm topics for papers, and so on. I could go on and on and on. So that was one community that we ran, which I've never had more fun than having all of these faculty in a room being like, here's what I made this week, and me being able to say, wow, I never thought of that as a use case for AI. So that was great. And then just to sort of have the flip side, I also had two faculty learning communities running where we were reading a book called The Opposite of Cheating. Again, I apologize for my higher ed bias here. Obviously, faculty are very concerned about academic integrity right now, and this particular book is the book that I think has most trying to address this right now, is published in February 2025 with AI in mind. So I had 9 faculty split into 2 groups that sort of tried to absorb the lessons of this book so they could think about how to redesign their classes and really focus on the issue of integrity in their courses in fall 2026. So that's a lot of what I've done for my role as a faculty developer on Wesleyan's campus. But one part of the story I really wanted to share with you, which is why this story has gotten so complicated over time, is that when things really started in December 2022, some of the initial push within the sort of academic world was, oh God, the college essay, which is the way that most faculty in most disciplines sort of measure what students have learned, it's over, right? Now we have this tool that can just write papers. And that was a little unfortunate that that's where things went because it did sort of create, I think, a lot of distrust between faculty and students. And we're still struggling with that to this day. But I just want to show a little piece of what was in this article. This article was published in The Atlantic about a week after ChatGPT 3.5 came out. I think it came out on November 30th, 2022, and this came out on around like December 6th. So the author says humanities departments judge their undergraduate students on the basis of their essays. They give PhDs on the basis of a dissertation's composition. What happens when both processes can be significantly automated? I figure it will take 10 years for academia to face this new reality. 2 years for the students to figure out the tech, 3 more years for the professors to recognize that students are using the tech, and then 5 years for university administrators to decide what, if anything, to do about it. Teachers are already some of the most overworked, underpaid people in the world. They are already dealing with a humanities in crisis, excuse me. And now this, I feel for them. So this is where we started right after ChatGPT came out. And I think the timing in that middle paragraph is just about right in terms of what I'm seeing on my own campus. I don't necessarily know what's happening on other campuses, but I probably assume Wesleyan's somewhere in the middle of the pack. So what's challenging, however, is that even that has become so outdated. And so sometimes when I'm having conversations with some folks where they'll say, oh, well, AI is X, I'll be like, yeah, no, that was 2 years ago. It's a completely different world now based on what they're saying. And so just from the educational point of view, if you think about what happens in an academic classroom, a professor assigns a paper, a student might ask an LLM to write the paper for them, and the student submits the paper. The paper, when that happens, does not represent what the student has necessarily learned, especially if they literally just put in a prompt and copied it out without doing anything else, what ChatGPT or Gemini told them and submitted it. But what's interesting about that story is that whole story is sort of fetishizing this one particular piece of college academic work, which is the paper, which anyone who's gone to high school or college knows how important that is as this like transactional thing in this way in which students represent what they know to faculty. But the reality is, as we realized probably about a year in, is that students can use LLMs in lots of different ways that aren't necessarily about writing a paper. They can use LLMs to summarize their readings, right? So it took me about a year and a half before I started saying to Andrew White, the library director at Wesleyan, oh God, I think we have a bigger problem. It's not what's going to happen with how they use these tools for writing. It's probably a bigger question of what happens when they're just uploading PDF readings that were assigned to them to whatever LLM and getting a summary and not doing the reading. They might be using various tools to brainstorm. I do too. They use AI. I've heard this a lot increasingly to create, they'll basically like upload a chapter that they're about to have a test on, ask the LM to create quiz questions for them so that they can basically engage in what are considered good practices, retrieval practices to study for the exam. various ways in which AI can, for instance, create practice problems for economics students if the problem set they were assigned was not enough. And you can do a whole lot with data analysis, and I'll give you an example of that in a moment. So the story is way past where it started, and this becomes one of the big challenges in talking to anyone about any of this. If you're not dipping in enough to these tools, you lose track of where these tools have moved. I also want to note that this notion of, in the case of college students, using tools for tasks that faculty may or may not know that they're doing, that's been going on for a long time, long before the current, like, kind of last 3 year period. So, as an example, the students that I've worked with have been really nice about showing me the kinds of tools they've been using all along, long before ChatGPT. Those of you guys who have perhaps kids in high school or college might be aware of Quizlet, Photomath, Khan Academy, which has its own AI tool as well, Google Translate, which is like a huge problem for folks in the languages, not to mention the ways in which they employ group chats with other students in the class to help them through assignments. And so there's lots of tools out there. And we've done some work surveying what these students use. So, in terms of the educational context, this issue of AI and students using it in ways that maybe we don't want, although we're often not sure, it goes back a long way in terms of what are students doing when they're not in our classrooms and how are they getting work done. So I want to pause here after I do this slide, so get ready with your questions. This brings me to a kind of moment where I just want to pause and say it's really hard to talk about AI right now. And here's a couple of reasons why, and I'm sure you guys could add to the list and feel free to do that. So one is that in any given room that you're in, people are all over the place in terms of what they understand about AI. So some just don't realize all the different ways it can be used, a lot of what you just saw 2 slides ago. Some are not putting in particularly powerful prompts. And so what they get back from these tools are not necessarily that great. And so they very quickly are disappointed. I've often joked, but it's a serious joke. You see in these tools what you want to see. So if you go in and you're not really happy to be using it, you're probably not going to put in a very good prompt. You're probably going to get something back that's not that interesting or maybe disappointing. You don't bother to iterate, and then you say, I don't know what the big deal is with some of these tools. And then I really also want to highlight this issue of developmental differences of different generative AI users. I joke with the Wesleyan students, hey, listen, I'm not so worried about my brain. Like, I learned how to read and write in college. I learned to develop my own voice and my own opinions and what I want out of what some particular output. And I might use AI to kind of work on some stuff, but I know what I want and I know how I need to get there. I am worried about 18-year-olds or 14-year-olds or 12-year-olds using these tools who haven't been through that developmental process that I have been through as I approach 50. So that makes things hard because is it fair for me to say I can use this tool, but you as an 18-year-old can't? So that gets very, very tricky in terms of having these conversations. Now I have a laundry list on the right side of the screen of other things that make this hard. Uneven access to tools. This is an enormous problem. I'd be curious to know for those of you guys in the room who is paying for a tool versus using a free version. So you probably know the free version is usually not the most recent version and isn't as powerful as the paid for versions. On campuses, this is definitely a question. So some students might have access to very, very powerful versions of large language models that allows them to do things that other students can't. How do you handle that? I mean, it's an enormous issue. Uneven access to tools that preserve privacy. So I kind of put that as a second bullet because that's huge. So, for example, at Wesleyan, through my budget, so first I have a budget, not everybody does on any college campus. I am paying for a part of a business license that is managed by ITS at Wesleyan for ChatGPT. It's within what's called the walled garden. So I can put data in that, I can put information in it. And I don't have to worry that OpenAI that owns ChatGPT, that they're seeing it or using it to train their next large language model. So it's part of the contract that we've signed with them. So I can put more sensitive data in there than someone who just has a free version of ChatGPT. But the privacy issue is huge, right? And what you're seeing, I think, at corporations, I don't work in the corporate world, but I have a friend at one of the many companies in Hartford who just started working there. And she said, oh, what they've done is they've struck a deal with Anthropic that owns Claude. They have Claude installed on their local servers so that they can use it with company data and it's not getting sucked back into like the AI monster in California or wherever. So that's an issue in terms of having any kinds of conversations. By the way, I should also note too, it is possible for all of you in this room to go download a large language model to your own laptop. So no one can see what you put in there. Most of us don't know how to do that. I've literally never done it. It's one of my summer projects coming up. The rapid changes from month to month. It's very, very hard to keep up with what's going on. I think August of 2025, so many releases from so many of these AI companies. I remember many of us on campus were like, oh, I just want it to all go away because we couldn't keep up on all of the change. Oops. The political positioning regarding generative AI, I'm sure you've gotten a sense of this. There's a notion of, are you with the tech bros? Are you not? Do you care about the climate? Do you not? Often these things are really presented to people in black and white, which I personally find a little bit problematic, but we can debate that if you want. But it also makes it really hard to say, hey, I'm really interested in what AI can do, because you often piss off somebody else in the room, or vice versa. And one of the big challenges for anyone who has kids, as well as anyone anywhere, is that generative AI tools are sort of becoming embedded in tools we were already using. So it's no longer I make the decision to go to a ChatGPT window and do something with AI. It's in my phone, it's in some other software tool I've used for 10 years, and it keeps popping up and being like, can I help you with that? Like the old paperclip in Word, if you're old enough, you know what I'm talking about. So it's very hard to even legislate stuff in classrooms, for instance, because what does it mean to use AI or not AI when it's becoming like electricity and it's embedded in all of your devices? General resistance to change, right? Like these things are really hard, and you often have to change your workflows and your views of the world in order to have these kinds of conversations around AI. And a desire for quick fixes. So I think in higher ed, what you see is a desire to use AI detection tools to detect when students are using AI. These are deeply problematic tools. But I get it because it is so hard to kind of retool a classroom to account for all of this use. It's easier if there's just some way that you can figure out whether students are using it and scold them for doing so. So I definitely want to pause on this screen and get a couple comments, maybe questions before we go on, because I've talked a lot and that'll give me a chance to get my breath. So what do you got for me?
So the first thing, Rachel, because I got a private message
Yep.
because we did forget to reiterate this right before we started with you. Everyone will get your slide deck.
Yeah.
We have the wonderful additional resource that Jamie Tomasetti has prepared with sort of the general promptings, particularly for those that are new to using the generative AI, as well as a link to this recorded session. So
Yep.
please, enjoy the conversation, brainstorm lots of questions, but don't worry, you have to write down every word on the slide or that Rachel shares, because we will make sure you get that.
And please note too, if you find it useful to use these slides, share them with other people, steal text from them, go right ahead. I could not care less. I'm happy for anyone to use this in any way that you want. So,
Wonderful.
questions,
Thank you
thoughts,
for that.
comments?
So it's a little quiet on the question front at the moment.
I
I will
should
ask
note
one.
no
Someone
questions
did ask
received.
one earlier, though, as you
Yep.
started in this. So did the college align on an AI policy prior to experimenting, or did your experimenting lead to really thinking through what maybe you might need in a policy?
Yeah. No, we
How
had
did
no
you all approach
policy.
that?
Yeah, we had no policy. We have some policies now. We do not have a universal policy about how it's dealt with in classrooms. President Roth has been very clear that he doesn't want something universal because whether AI is appropriate in a particular classroom is going to be highly dependent on what the faculty member is trying to accomplish in that room. But we've had some fights this semester about this. So it's getting complicated as more people sort of realize the extent to which this is permeating everything. So the first policy, and I'll share this in a second on screen, that we did get in place, I wouldn't say I wouldn't say we were early birds, but I think we got it in within a year was a policy, like an institutional level policy about what anyone who's employed at the school can put into a large language model, because that gets to the privacy issue. And the biggest concern is faculty and staff who have access to FERPA data. So this is the student data that's federally protected. So we really wanted to be clear with faculty, hey, and staff, you have access to various kinds of data, and depending on what kind of AI you're interacting with, you may or may not be able to put information in. So that was the first one. I'll give a screenshot of it in a second. But yeah, it took us about probably, I think, a year for that to happen. And a lot of it, and I would like to note, I was one of the people that early on was like, we need a policy. We need a policy. This is bad. And then I was the first one to get dinged for violating the policies. That tells you something. There's a tool that, and we've since adjusted the policy, but a tool that has been a lifesaver for many of us in the qualitative world is Otter AI. It's a transcription tool. I've been using it for 6 years, right? But of course, it's Otter.ai. 6 years ago, if someone said, is your data going to be used for training? I wouldn't even know what you were talking about. So I've always been using that tool to record interviews that I do. It transcribes the interviews. It's amazing. And so when they first put the policy in place based on how they were classifying things, I got caught in it. So I was like, well, be careful what you wish for, right? Is that me complaining about not having a policy, and then I'm the one who gets spanked for the policy. So,
And
great
Rachel,
question. So
I'll add, if I may, Rachel,
yeah.
we started a policy and started out with our technology committee, and we know it's going to evolve. So we're happy, and we're at the beginning stages of everything. So we're happy to share that policy with anybody that wants it to.
Yeah, it's a great question. Any other questions before we go on? I'm happy to take any.
I was also looking, some people sent early questions, so I was just looking to
Yep.
see if anything tied in at this level.
Yep.
And I do think one person, and I think this is something that we're hearing more and more of, and it would be interesting to know your students' reactions when you brought that up. There's a concern of the dumbing down, like the loss of developmental.
Yeah.
Have you had, like, do the students, have you had that conversation and more in depth with them? Do they understand that? And I guess we think about it too when we're writing, knowing our voice as a community foundation, and Chat GPT doesn't really get that. Like, you have to really work it once you
Yeah.
get your basics.
Yeah. Yeah. No, huge concern. I think the average Wesleyan student, I think, is concerned about that. I can't say that's reflective of all college students. I mean, Wesleyan students are a certain breed, but we have not surveyed the entire campus yet. I think that's going to happen, and it's not going to come from the administration. It's probably going to come from the Student Government Association, and they're working on a survey right now. And we did put a question in that survey that said, what are reasons why you don't use these tools? And one of the options there is, I'm really worried about getting dependent on it, and I'm worrying that it's going to affect my learning. And I suspect those are going to be some of the highest sort of responses, that with the climate impact. So yeah, definitely an issue. And we don't really know what's going to happen, right? I mean, even one thing to be really wary of too, I almost put this on the list, is I think one of the tricks about talking about any of this is the way the media interfere. So they pluck a study out, and then it lands on the front page of the Washington Post, like the water bottle one did. And then that drives the entire climate conversation, which is way more complicated than that one article actually put out there, right? And the same thing has happened about like brain decay. I think this came out from an MIT study that got kind of over-reported. And the media's done this for years with like studies about like drug use and that kind of thing too. So it's very hard because we all get stuck on one or two studies, but the reality is there's been lots of research, but most of it hasn't been published yet. It takes 2 years to go through peer review, right? So we don't even have a really good sense of what the impact of some of these tools will be on things like cognitive development. Yeah. All right, I'm going to go a little bit more, but again, feel free to ask more questions. I'm going to flip through this part pretty quickly, but because someone did ask about policy and I'd seen that in the pre-questions, I put policies in quote. Some of them are not even policies, they're like statements. But this is where we were as of, let me see, last September. And there is a policy on on the table right now that the faculty will vote on in May that remains to be seen what will happen with that one. But as of last September, we had our generative AI usage policy. This was the one put out by IT that I mentioned previously. I'm just giving you a quick screenshot of it. But this is the one that was really trying to be clear. Depending on what kind of data or information you're touching, you may or may not put it in these models. So you can see there's a link there to another policy, the data classification policy. And you'll see some of these policies have different audiences. And different sort of like intents. We had one that came out from academic affairs. That's the wing in which I work. It's the provost's basically the boss of all the faculty. That wasn't really a policy as much of a statement, right? Just trying to like make faculty kind of be aware of various kinds of things. This has not been updated in, I think, a year and a half and probably needs to be. It has some warnings there, the part I screenshotted about AI detection and so forth. And again, I know I'm going through this really fast. We do have a student honor code that's been in effect for a number of years. They added a quick line that said you can't use AI unless your professor said you can, basically. And that's where we are right now. We haven't changed it. We probably need to. Um, so that's just another sort of policy in the mix. There's a syllabus template that comes out of my office, and last summer I updated it to give an example for syllabi for faculty of having a nuanced AI policy, which I think has become so much more important based on all those different tasks I had on an earlier screen of all the different ways AI can be used. And we also, oh, I forgot to change this. We also have, that should be a different screenshot. We made a little card that was called Generative AI 101 Talking Points that basically had 5 points that we introduced to first year students. It was like AI is everywhere. Every professor is going to have a different policy. Ask questions, always disclose your use. That was essentially all it was. Sorry, I forgot to update that screen. So those were our policies. And I'm going to pause there and just let you think about that because you can see how complicated that is, right? They came from different parts of campus, they had different sort of goals, and they had different audiences in mind. So this is a sort of wishy-washy way in which we've been trying to handle this kind of organically. And going back to, I think it was either Cynthia or Thayer's point, this notion of we know we're going to have to update it again, right? Like we know all of these things are sort of in play. So I want to make sure that we switch a little bit more to kind of AI in practice, get a little bit out of like the history and the theory piece of it. So just to sort of do a little bit of level setting, because I don't know where everybody is. This is something that I've shared a number of times in a number of settings. I actually did some professional development for Mercy High School's faculty last June because my husband teaches there and it's my alma mater, and I shared it there just to make sure we're sort of on the same page. I like to think of a large language model as an engine. It can't do anything on its own. So, for instance, one large language model is GPT-4. That is one of the many that ChatGPT, i.e., OpenAI, came out with. When you go to ChatGPT, like I think this URL has actually changed, but at the time that I first did this screenshot, it was chat.openai.com. And you're basically going to what I would call a vanilla sort of um, large language model interface. When you go to that interface, think of it as like your basic car, and then the engine that's running that car is a particular large language model. And in this case, GPT-4, although like I'm in the most recent version of ChatGPT, and I think it's like GPT 5.3 at this point in time. And then also think about all these sort of apps that some of you guys have probably interacted with, and many of you probably have not. Google Notebook LM, which I'll show in just a second. Conmigo, which is the AI tool inside of Khan Academy. Bots you might make on your own, like the ones I told you guys my faculty were making. Think of those as custom alterations to a car. This is when you take a large language model and you give it a more defined purpose and much more specific instructions that sit sort of in the back end of the car. And every time you go to this particular app, it already knows all these things that you want to have happen. So these bots are very powerful. You see them increasingly, and it allows you to get much better output, I would say. And I want to give you just a few examples of that. So one is Google Notebook LM. For those of you guys who still have your hands on the keyboard, I'm just super curious. Can you put yes or no in the chat? Like, have you used it? Have you not used it? Do you know what I'm talking about? I'd love to know where people are because it's one of the ones that I think is dreamy. So I'm seeing some no's. That's great for me to know. Mostly no's, a few yes. Okay. Look, someone's hearing about it twice in one day. I hope that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So thank you for sharing some of that. I just want to give you a sense of what this looks like. This is a screenshot of my Google Notebook. I'm not completely up to speed on this, but I think if you have a Gmail account, you have an access to at least some version of the notebook. Maybe not every single bell and whistle. So basically, the way Google Notebook works is each of these that you're seeing on screen, it's a notebook, and you can upload things into it. And the interaction you have with the large language model, which is obviously Gemini, because that's the Google tool or the Google large language model, and this is Google Notebook LM. The large language model basically just interacts with what you uploaded to it. So as an example, and this is a real example, I mentioned previously my students interviewed other students about the concept of busy work. And you'll see in the left-hand screen, we uploaded the transcriptions from each of those interviews, transcriptions that were done in Otter AI, as I mentioned before. There were 55 of them. Google Notebook will only take 50 documents at a time. So we uploaded them all in. And in this window right here, the chat window, I can ask anything of Google Notebook. Like, what kinds of themes are you seeing here? Help me come up with a way to code all of this data. What are the main sort of takeaways? You can do anything. And if you see it there, the numbers in the chat window, you can see a 6 and a 1 and a 5. Those all point right back to the source. So if I click on that 5, it will bring out the transcript from which it's pulling something. So that's super cool. But what's really interesting, and this is where it goes back to bots, is they have this what they call the studio in the right-hand sidebar. And these are like little bots basically that have already been sort of prompted in the back end to do very, very specific things. And this is where I have to get out of the slide deck because there's really no better way to show this than to actually show it live. So for instance, it has this mapping feature, basically does a concept map out of all that data 50 transcripts that tells me what the definitions of busy work are, some common examples, when is work actually more meaningful, what's the advice that students actually have for professors. And if I click on any one of these, it'll back out, but ultimately it's going to bring up information in the chat window pulling from transcripts, and I can find out like what was the advice that they had for faculty. So now it's summarizing what the students actually said. A big one being when you assign something, explain why you assigned it, which doesn't happen as much as you might like. But so that's one example. That's the mind map. The most stunning probably are the video ones. I'm not sure how well this is going to play, but I'm going to try it for a split second. Sound is not going to play. Anyway, it's basically a slide deck, and there is an audio overview. It sounds exactly like a real person. It's fairly stunning and shocking to actually see it. And there is a parallel, there's an audio overview, which basically creates a podcast of two people talking about whatever you uploaded. You can even raise your hand and interrupt them, and they'll say, oh, you have a question. What's your question? And you talk to the person, and it answers the question with whatever material you gave it. So it's really hard to tell you how completely stunning this is. The one that I have found the most stunning here is it actually pulls out from all of our transcripts different students, how they define busy work, what courses they were talking about, and so forth. So it says President's Roth class. I'm really sorry that came up. The really funny part about that is they were annoyed with a bot that President Roth used in his class that I built. So I thought it was very funny that they complained about the bot and called it busy work. So this thing is insanely powerful. And if you do anything where you're having to sort of summarize qualitative information, like these transcripts that I have here, um, it's kind of stunning to think what it can do and do very, very quickly. So I wanted to make sure that you guys saw that. Gonna do that. Another tool, and this is also in Google, is called Deep Research, which basically will do a literature review on any topic that you want. So this is just a screenshot here, but I asked it to compare the outcomes of taking notes on a laptop versus by hand. A lot of our faculty have been banning laptops recently, so I was trying to get a sense of what the literature said. And it's fascinating to watch this thing work. It starts to actually say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to start looking for information. And it actually starts to tell you the information it's looking to do. Right now, so you'll see like there's Reddit things in there. You're like, well, that's not really good information. It's trying to get access to peer-reviewed articles, and the list that appears here will only get better over time as Google continues to make its contracts with publishers so that the way in which it's crawling the web, it can get behind paywalls and actually use peer-reviewed articles to flesh out the literature review. And what I love about this screenshot is just that you can see, and forgive me for saying it this way, you can see the LLM thinking, right? Like it's talking you through what its strategy is, which is actually very interesting and interesting to show to a student. But obviously it also is really worrisome for faculty because now this tool can kind of do your research for you. So having said all of that, the other thing I want to say about bots, so I consider both Google LM to have bots within it, as well as that deep research tool because it has been trained behind the scenes to do something pretty sophisticated. There is an organization called PlayLab that allows you to make bots really easily in like 10 different large language models. As far as I know, it's still free. I have a free account. You have to get on a waiting list, and once you get in, they make you go through some training, and then you have access. One reason I find it interesting is that it's FERPA compliant, so it's not going to take student data and do something inappropriate with it. The bot I made for Roth's class forces the students to engage in a conversation with it about course material before they go to their discussion session. And just for an example, I could make bots all day long, and you'll get this the slide deck later, so you can actually look at all of these. These are links that will work for you. So because I'm in a higher ed context, I'm always interested in little tools I can make that can help students learn something. And you can kind of see that with some of the tools that I have here. The office hours buddy is very interesting because the idea is not to replace office hours, but to get students to go to office hours by sort of preparing them for what that's going to look like. So we have lots of first generation low income students who might be uncomfortable with that model. And so the idea there is we want to keep the human in the loop. We desperately want the human in the loop. The bot can help get the human in the loop if we do this right. And another product out there that I just want to point out is called Boodlebox. I use this a lot with my faculty. There is a free version. It's limited relative to the pro version, but also lets you toggle between different large language models because different LLMs are better or worse for certain tasks. I'll give you one example and then I'll move on. Google Gemini is really good for absorbing and digesting lots of documents, like you just saw with Google Notebook. So I am now done with everything I wanted to tell you. I want to pause on this screen. We don't have to talk about what's there, but I'd also love to know how you're seeing generative AI being used in good ways, bad ways, in the organizations in which you work or interact with. And I'll also, again, happily answer any more questions that might be coming up at this point. So I'll leave those questions on screen for a second, but then I will probably stop sharing so I can actually see all of your faces. Donor cultivation and engagement. So embarrassingly, I don't know a lot yet about what my specific advancement office is doing, but based on my work with the Council for Independent Colleges, we did a whole month working with advancement and getting advancement to think about the ways in which they would use AI, and some of that might be data analysis on who your prospects are. UVA, I think, is piloting a tool where this is a little scary. It's like an AI bot that looks like a real person that does solicitations for younger alums. They didn't create it. It's a company that they did a contract with. So I think there's data analysis, getting AI to write really, really customized emails for alums based on what you have in your data is probably also something you're going to see a lot of. And then I would argue from the grant side of it, putting in an application for a grant with the rubric that you know the grant agency is going to be using to say, am I meeting what the foundation wants? So kind of using AI for feedback on grant applications, I think is going to be big as well.
Thanks, Rachel. And just one follow-up. I apologize. I
Yeah.
can't type fast enough to keep a dialogue going. But within that office, then, is there accountability if there is some sort of error with the language model or a piece of data so that you can say to your donors, hey, this person or this group is going to resolve it for you?
Yeah, I don't know. I certainly at Wesleyan's office, I don't know whether any of that has been resolved yet. And I think it's going to be one of those things that has to be developed. There's probably another policy in there. And also a lot of education of how to use these tools in ways that you as a human still are in the loop and doing the appropriate monitoring to make sure that there aren't mistakes. So that's a great question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Ooh, I see lots of
Yeah, we
comments
have.
coming in.
Yeah.
What do you
So And
Who's got their
actually, one
eyeballs
of
on
these
that?
is
There, go
really
for it.
good because it ties to a question that got sent in early, and I will say ties into a topic that we were doing with a governance workshop. So, we're getting a question of what are there transcription tools that you have experienced or tested that you think are best, particularly if you're using separate specialized audio recorders for the interviews? And it ties in with a pre-session question we got about the pros and cons of using similar transcription services
Hmm.
for committees, board minutes, and other meetings.
Hmm.
And I will put a caveat, or no, I'll put a little one more statement to that, Rachel, when you to talk about the different pieces. It using transcription tools came up in a good governance workshop as a reminder to people that if they don't destroy those transcripts, they're considered permanent meeting notes and therefore could be
Discoverable.
requested under the Freedom of Information Act.
Yes, yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, as I said, the transcription tool I use the most is Otter AI because it allows folks to see the transcript on screen and listen to the audio at the exact same time and
Oh,
edit inaudibles. So I love it for that. And I'm doing a very specific thing. I'm doing qualitative research. I should know, even within Microsoft Word, there is a transcription tool, and I think it predates Copilot. I know someone in my office uses it to transcribe board meeting minutes. But it is also worth thinking about, yeah, when you use a transcription tool, how do you feel about it being in the cloud somewhere? How confidential is the stuff that you're talking about? Do you have a contract with a service so that your data is protected? These are all things that you should be thinking about. Do you need something that you can install locally so that your stuff is protected? I believe Apple, there was something, I think it still exists, called Whisper. There was a transcription tool that can be installed locally. I'm not a Mac user, so I do not have it, but that's one of the other ones I hear about. And one other quick example, we did a CIC webinar yesterday, actually, and one of the four examples that we showed from someone on a specific campus was how she created a bot that would take the transcription from a meeting. So that it had already been transcribed by an AI tool, but what the bot would do was get it into an order and format that would be used for the permanent record. So what was voted on, what were the yeas and nays? So it would basically scrape the transcript to get the information that you want, and then you can delete the actual transcript. And so
interesting.
that organization had very specific needs, so they put that together in a certain kind of way.
Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting. Thank
Great
you.
question.
Let's see. Lots of people throwing things up here. This ties in with in general with particularly with some of the next stages that are coming out with Claude, et cetera, that it can attach directly into the systems. Are there specific bots that you have played with or your colleagues are working with, or you know of others that are particularly useful for smaller organizations that are helping to sort of streamline certain things that are in the like background or the busy work, or even for your students? Are they using it?
Yeah, it's hard to answer because
Yeah.
part of one thing I should note, you're going to start to see, we already are seeing it, lots of companies like AI companies, and
Mm.
I'm not talking about Anthropic or OpenAI, but these companies that are using AI and selling you a service where essentially they've created very customized sort of bot-like environments and they're going to connect to your institutional data and do all these things for you, right? And sometimes I think what's going to happen, like, will Wesleyan have one of these services within 10 years? Probably. There's going to be things where it is worth paying a company that has put a lot of thought into the architecture to do this work on your behalf and create, when I saw this in the comments, actual agents that are literally doing things on your behalf. But meanwhile, there's things that you might want to do that are very specific to your office, your work, your organization, where creating your own bot might be the way to go. To be honest, right now, if you don't have like regular access to a tool, I really like BoodleBox for doing something that I feel reasonably safe, as long as I'm not putting something too confidential in, as a way that gives you a little bit of a sandbox to sort of get to know these tools. But in terms of what are the right tools for the task in your organization, it really depends on the organization, which is where if you get into the habit of making your own bot, you can decide, like, this is the thing I want. This is what I want it to look like. This is the output I'm looking for. I'm going to make this bot do what I want. By the way, making a bot is no longer hard. You literally ask AI, write the prompt for a bot. Here's what I want the bot to do. Write the prompt, then you tweak it, and then you do it. So you use AI to create more AI, which is horrific, but kind of where we are. Yeah.
Right. So someone said that they had know that Anthropic or had put in the comments, obviously, as we've all seen to your earlier point about the news, Anthropic's been in the news a lot lately, particularly now with Claude as being part of it. And because of what Anthropic has been facing, et cetera. And if I remember correctly, is it Anthropic recently who gave some open source access or something, right? Is there a concern about using Claude that you have seen or heard of, or any
Yeah.
of these that may
Yeah.
be tied to Anthropic's open source
Yeah.
release?
I would argue you should always be cautious with any of these tools, especially if you are in a free version and you do not have an agreement in place with them about what they are allowed to do with your data. So that's number one. Anthropic historically, and I admit I'm not completely up to date on everything, was, especially in the first few years, described as the AI company with the strongest sort of ethical framework. Like they have an ethical framework. I think they publicize it. So in many ways, you could argue Anthropic is one that deserved more attention than it's gotten up until what happened federally a few weeks ago. Many people have been, including myself, reluctant to shift to Claude entirely. For instance, I've been working with ChatGPT for 3 years. It knows me really well. I know that probably freaks out at least a few folks in the room, and it should, but it knows how I write. It knows what my job is. It knows what I want. And there is apparently a way that I can like export my personality from this AI and upload it to Anthropic, and I haven't done it yet. So you'll see there's like a bit of inertia for some folks in terms of shifting products when they've already sort of built a relationship with their AI tool. But Claude is supposed to be very good at a number of things. It's supposed to be the best writer. So if Google Gemini is the best like digester of documents, some folks will tell you that ChatGPT is the best thinker and that Claude is the best writer. And so I would also really argue, and this is why I like Boodlebox, like their pro version is $120 for a year. You have a pro version of Boodlebox, you can play with Claude, you can play with ChatGPT, you can play with Llama, you can play with ones I haven't even played with yet, and get a sense of what these different tools are actually good for. And that will really help you all build your own AI literacy at a fairly low cost, but always be mindful about what you're putting into these tools and pause, especially if you're dealing with your own personal private data or an institution's private data. What was the last tool? Probably Llama is the one I just mentioned.
Or is it Boodlebox?
Or is it Boodlebox? If it's Boodlebox, Boodle box, Boodle. And Llama within it is the Meta-owned LLM, the Mark Zuckerberg large language model. Yeah.
And for those that are getting this, everybody's getting the slides, but as a reminder, when Rachel was showing the various ways that she's been using the notebook and Google on one of those slides, the Boodlebox logo was on one of those slides.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Thank
there
you
is
for
there as
remembering
well.
that. Yeah.
I tried.
Yeah.
And you said something interesting that tied into a couple of questions. One that we got earlier as we were transitioning, that you found that the more you use ChatGPT, it's learning you and it's becoming Rachel. And I think that is one of the biggest questions just in playing with it, and we've noticed is that it's trying to learn, particularly by when we upload, if we upload letters or something, what the community foundation sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
But how well have you found ChatGPT has really learned, like if you had your ChatGPT send me something after emailing you with lots, would I be able to know the difference? Like how much like you does it really sound?
Such an open question, and I haven't studied it formally, although we definitely have to do that. So I did build a bot that is called my faculty emailer. My faculty were very horrified when I told them about this. And it has actual examples of my writing. And so it's been instructed like when you write a draft of an email, and I obviously always check it over and tweak it, but when you write a draft, it needs to sound like me. And the first thing I sort of asked the bot to do was write a style guide based on what you've seen me do. Like, what is my style? And then now that is the style you need to use when you do any first drafting for me. So I've been reasonably happy with it. I don't think I ever send something out without me still mucking around with it. But for first drafting, I find it reasonably helpful if I have trained it properly. So I had this conversation with someone the other night where he was telling me how he was using AI. It was a faculty member, and he said, I don't really like the style of writing. And I said, have you uploaded your own writing and asked it to write like you? And he paused and he looked at me, and I was like, okay, well, that's your next test. Because yeah, the way it writes by default is probably not what most of us want, but it can learn. How well it learns, like there, would you know? I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know. It's a good question. Yeah.
you never know, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
okay.
But I
So
will argue that some of the research says that we as humans think we're better at detecting AI writing than we are. It's a depressing way to
yeah.
think about this, but we think we can detect it,
Right.
but can we?
So I will ask, and I'm not, I don't want to, I am interested in general because someone posed the question, and I know it's on some people's, in the forefront of their minds without going way down into huge pro and con conversations. In general, what do you think the environmental sense that you're seeing from, particularly, I'm interested in the students because I know they're very cognizant of a lot of the impacts that generations have made on our planet. And do they see this? Are you hearing it from your colleagues of really feeling very divided on the
Yeah.
on the use and the environmental impact?
It's probably the number one thing if I give a talk in front of students that they will bring up. And they're not wrong to be concerned, right? And I think we all know a lot of this has been two things, like general usage of water, but also the building of data centers in vulnerable communities, right? So those are the two things, and they're obviously things that are important. I'm always going to be the person who complicates it. So I will tend to tell students, I'm glad that you're worried about these things. You might have more power in talking to legislators, writing your legislators, than opting out of using ChatGPT, right? Like that. Unfortunately, you're probably not having enough of an impact by opting out. Number two, I tend to bring up is listen, the data center issue is larger than AI. I mean, they've been building them rapidly, and that's why we've heard about it in the news in response to the AI piece. But it's really a story around cloud storage, which we've been using cloud storage for a very long time. So, and if you're not feeling guilty about all the photos you have stored in your Google Drive, it's worth having that conversation about why one bothers you but not the other, right? So there's that kind of I'm a jerk to my students sometimes, but I really want them to like not feel that they're morally superior because they decided not to use ChatGPT today, but understand it was super complicated. There is a site, and I can send all of this to you guys later so you can send it out to the group it's called makeuseof.com or something like that. And it allows students, it was meant to be a teaching tool to compare a particular digital task with another digital task to see which one uses more energy. And if you compare editing a paragraph in ChatGPT to watching an hour on Netflix, guess which one burns a whole lot more? It's not ChatGPT, right? So I put those in because I really just want to make sure the students have a complicated conversation. And what I worry about is when I get anyone in the room who just puts their hands like this and says, I don't use this and I'm morally better than you who does. Because I'm like, story's not that easy to really, I don't buy that personally. It's complicated. So, and then I can get very jerky. I'm like, well, I don't get on planes a whole lot. Do you? Like, we could have this fight about a number of tools or a number of tasks that are really, really horrible for the environment, right? So, and not that we shouldn't be worried about the data center piece, which is really an issue around federal and regional and local regulation and how that gets managed, but it's just complicated.
Yeah.
I feel very bad for these students because I do just also feel like they feel very powerless in a moment in time where it feels like the world is burning and this is something that they can say, I'm going to do, and that they can control. And I respect that. But again, it's complicated. Hopefully I haven't pissed off half the call now because I said all this.
No, I think almost everybody's still with us, so.
Is Jamie still here? I just want to say that I'm looking at, she calls it the Chat GPT playbook that she did, and that we'll be sending out. And it really, as I'm reading through it once again, Jamie, you've captured and sort of outlined a lot of the things that Rachel already talked about in your playbook. So thank you for doing that. And I don't know, Jamie, if you have any words to say about how you use it as a small business owner.
I think she had to leave us. I'm
I
just.
think
Oh,
she's off,
okay.
yeah,
But anyway,
yeah.
you'll get the playbook, and as I'm going through it, Rachel, she really has summarized a lot of the slides.
Good, that's good because
for
I
you. So,
haven't seen it yet, or I didn't have a chance to look at it. So it's good that
yeah, so
we're
it's good. So thank
it'd be
you.
worse if we weren't. Yeah.
So and everybody's been great, and so I'm waiting to see if there are any others, but I am going to put you on the spot. We had a really good question pop up earlier as we were preparing for this, which is, so it's here. Do you have predictions for the future? And it ties in, I will say, I'm the first to admit, I grew up on science fiction. I have read all types. And of course, there's that piece in the back of my mind personally, that envisions all the worst case sci-fi things that occur. And so do you have any predictions about
I can steal somebody else's prediction, which is just a really nice line. One of the trustees at Wesleyan said, he said something to the effect of, we're overestimating the impact in the short term, but we're underestimating the impact in the long term, which I thought was very helpful to think about. Like, and you can see this too, like when people are like, oh, we're going to have AI, like replace an administrative assistant within a year. I'm like, that's not going to happen. Like, I don't believe it, right? Because I also believe for these systems to really work well and not cause the mistakes that were alluded to earlier in the advancement case, you have to put investment up front, not just in what the policies are going to be, but in how you train the tools that you're using and how you train the double checkers of the tools to make sure there are no mistakes. There's a lot of like money and staffing that needs to go into creating tools that are going to be things that we actually trust. That, especially when you get into AI agent world, which is where these tools would literally be doing things on your behalf without you having to step in all the time and tell it to do it. Like, I don't think we're there yet. And I think it's going to be a while. But on the other hand, it's hard to imagine that this stuff isn't going to change us in some very deep ways in decades to come. So that's my sort of cop-out answer, but it's a really good line, right? So there's this issue of, one reaction I've seen on campus is, don't believe the AI companies, this is all hype. And of course they're right, but they're not totally right. Like, yeah, it's a lot of hype, but have you played with these things? Like, I can put a hat on my cat using Nano Banana, which is the image generator tool from Google, in like 3 seconds, and it looks damn real. So yeah, there is a hype piece of this, but it's not all hype. If you've used any of these tools, and you've used them a lot, it's definitely, sometimes you're just absolutely stunned by what it's actually doing. So
it's exciting and scary at the same time.
Yeah.
And see, then I've done my job, Cynthia, because that's exactly where I think people should be. It's super interesting and fascinating, and I grew up on a lot of science fiction myself, and it's also deeply concerning. One thing I always say too is, I don't think you can say anything about any of this unless you've seen these tools in action, even if your ultimate conclusion might be, these are deeply concerning and we really need to put checks and balances in place and block them in very moments. But you need to know what they're doing first before you can actually say that.
You have to have the knowledge
Yeah.
to make the decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You actually alluded to this, and I saw it in one of your slides because it made me think of some memes I've seen recently to send to my sister. And we did get a question. What do you have any sense of the impact in the arts and the creative world because so much of this now can just sort of be auto-generated and developed?
I mean, I don't know what's happening generally. It's not a part I have focused my attention on. Certainly on campus, students in the creative fields are much more likely to be AI resistant. I think that's not too surprising, but not completely. So folks who are doing stuff with video editing, there's some, well, AI's Sora, OpenAI Sora did get taken down, but there's really interesting things you can do with video and image editing that could help a particular field. But of course, a lot of what they're concerned about are the copyright issues.
Right.
I have heard many people say AI by nature is not creative, and I'm not sure I believe or agree with that. I grew up at Wesleyan in a music department that believed in things like John Cage. I think there's various very interesting ways to think about how AI could be used to inspire creativity. Um, and I think you have to not think about AI as much as you think about your interaction with AI to think about what it means to use it in ways that produce something new and different. We could definitely debate that over a drink, right? And I might lose, but I feel like sometimes we fetishize. I'm a sociologist of culture by training, so we fetishize creativity and art in a certain kind of way that I'm not completely sure I buy that an AI tool can't be used to produce something that's creative and new and different. But the copyright issues, I think, are yet to be resolved.
Mm.
My understanding from the big Anthropic case, because Anthropic came up before, Anthropic lost and won, if I understand correctly, a case in the last year. So what Anthropic did was part of the way it trained its initial models was it got texts that had been stored in LibGen, I think, which is one of these pirated kind of text warehouses that students use when they don't want to pay for a textbook. And so Anthropic, I think, helped themselves to that particular body of work. And because it was pirated, the piece of the lawsuit that they lost meant anyone whose work was in LibGen now gets some sort of payback from Anthropic, including many Wesleyan faculty. They keep asking me about this lawsuit as if I keep up to date with it, which I don't. But if I understand correctly, it won the larger argument, which is that the copyright issues are not resolved. That the claim that using texts in a new way to train a data model is a copyright violation, that is not necessarily the case. Like the copyright stuff is not clear yet. Stealing text from a pirated database, that's a problem. But using them in a particular new way that no one imagined, which is what happened with all of these AI companies, remains to be seen what that means, because I'm sure there's many more copyright lawsuits in the works. So that's tricky.
Do we have any more questions? Now I need to come back with better questions.
Oh no, this was great. And obviously
No,
I could go
I'm
for
at a
3
level. I
hours,
need
so.
to think about it and process and then come back with better questions.
I probably also said at least 3 things that were just completely wrong, either because things had changed or I misunderstood, but that's kind of where I am.
No, I think those hit on all the pre-questions I think that we had, and we can, and as well as those, unless anybody's got any last questions, or if I missed someone's question, please by all means give a shout out. No? Okay.
Rachel, we can't thank you enough, and thank everybody who's been on this call, really, to spend your time it's mind blowing and it's really very exciting. Very,
And
very
scary.
exciting.
Exciting and scary.
And
So
scary,
that.
right.
I'm
But we will
happy to
be,
chat whenever you guys need. I will send you a bunch of links and other things so you can send that
okay.
out to the group
All right.
tomorrow. Yeah.
I think resources, and then we will share the slide deck. We'll share Jamie's little playbook. I think that would be helpful. And if anybody wants our policy, we're happy to share that. Just email us and say you need the policy. Thank you so much. Round of
Thanks,
applause for
everyone.
you.
Wonderful.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
you very
everybody.
much.
Have a good evening.